You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 11th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme, Turkey's opposition leader appears before a court as protests across the country drag on. We'll look at the charges that İmamoğlu faces. Then to Japan, where the country's largest yakuza criminal organisation has ended a decade-long feud with the splinter group. After that,
so if Ukraine acts decisively, they're actually going to create a context to make Trump go, I want to be part of the winning team. I want to take credit for this. If they don't, the situation is just going to get worse.
Ian Brzezinski speaks to Andrew Mueller at the Delphi Economic Forum. We'll check in once more with our team at Salone del Mobile in Milan as well. And finally,
before I go, I just want to mention that I'm really smart and these tariffs sound really dumb.
Okay, thanks, Elon. Good luck on Mars. And live from New York, it's Saturday Night!
Could Saturday Night Live work here in the UK? All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Turkey's main opposition leader and the mayor of Istanbul, Ekrem İmamoğlu, will appear in court today to face allegations of abuse of public office and threatening a public prosecutor. Charges that he has denied and that have sparked outrage and protests across much of Turkey over the past few weeks since İmamoğlu was arrested and jailed. Turkish President Erdogan insists the charges are being brought by an independent judiciary, though it's pretty clear who benefits from İmamoğlu's imprisonment. Well, I'm joined now by Ruth Michaelson, journalist and Middle East correspondent based in Istanbul. Ruth, thanks for coming back on the show. Tell us first of all about these charges that the mayor of Istanbul will face today.
So İmamoğlu is facing two different sets of charges in court today. He's been appearing in a prison courtroom in Silivri prison, which is a high security facility on the edge of Istanbul. So the first set of charges involve the accusations that he insulted the Istanbul chief public prosecutor, Akın Gürlek. This is the same prosecutor that issued the corruption and embezzlement and also terrorism charges against him that saw him arrested and then imprisoned in this high security facility in March. The sets of charges today are from cases that existed before he was detained in March. So the first set of charges are over these accusations that he insulted Gürlek, the public prosecutor, or that he essentially threatened him because he made a statement where he essentially said, we will remove the mind that governs you from the mind of this nation, and accused Gürlek of basically politicizing charges against opposition figures, quite ironically. There is also a second set of charges that he is due to be in court for, which involve bid rigging during his time as a municipal official in Istanbul. Both of these sets of charges carry a potential prison term, the first set of up to about 7 years and 4 months. And prosecutors have also requested a ban from politics, which would prevent İmamoğlu from continuing to run as the presidential candidate. He was officially nominated as the Republican People's Party's presidential candidate last month on the same day that he was sent to prison.
Now, Ruth, there have been continuing protests over this across the country, despite a crackdown by the government as well. What is the mood in Istanbul in particular, where he is mayor?
Well, the mood in Istanbul is that we're seeing these protests start to pick back up again now after the Eid holiday. The government extended the Eid holiday in the hope that this would basically nullify a lot of the protests that we've seen, and mainly because it would cause university students to go back home. And now what the CHP, the Republican People's Party that Imamoglu is from, is trying to do is they are holding these twice weekly rallies, both in Istanbul. So we saw one in Shishli here earlier this week that was quite well attended, and also in other parts of the country. So there will be one in the Black Sea region, that's Erdogan's heartland, tomorrow, to sort of reignite these protests and get them moving. We've also seen some other protests from other kind of left-wing movements in Istanbul throughout this week, and there's an ongoing boycott of companies that the opposition say are close to Erdogan that is ongoing. And all of this is designed by the opposition to sort of keep the momentum of this movement, to make it feel like there's something forward-looking alongside nominating Imamoglu as a presidential candidate, even though we don't yet know when this election will be.
Well, that is one of the questions, isn't it, Ruth? But also not only when there will be an election, but as you say, the CHP has nominated Imamoglu for this election. Is there a point when the opposition may have to concede that that is no longer possible to have Imamoglu as their leader, whether they like it or not?
So I spoke to Özgür Özel, the head of the CHP, earlier this week. He sat for an interview before one of the rallies. And what he told me was that plans are in place, that they have a kind of plan A and plan B when it comes to running Imamoglu as a candidate. So if he remains in prison, he says that they have a plan to continue the campaign, even if Imamoglu is behind bars. The bigger problem in the way that he framed it is whether there is still a case that removes Imamoglu's university certificate, disqualifies that university qualification, because that's a prerequisite for running for president in Turkey. And so they have, he said, various strategies to deal with each of these potential outcomes. But one of them also involves running an alternative candidate, but where, in Özel's words, Imamoglu's face is still the one on the campaign bus, and that ultimately all of this is about a referendum for Turkey as to whether it remains, whether it retains some elements of a democracy, some elements of the democratic process, or whether it becomes something much closer to an autocracy.
Ruth, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure we'll have more in the coming days and weeks on this. That was Ruth Michaelson, journalist and Middle East correspondent. Now here's Monica Lillis with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. China has raised additional tariffs on US goods from 84% to 125% in an escalating trade war with Washington. This comes after President Donald Trump unveiled fresh reciprocal levies on Beijing on Thursday. President Xi Jinping has called on the EU to oppose so-called bullying from the United States, with Trump still hoping to secure a deal with the East Asian nation. 6 people have died after a tourist helicopter crashed in the Hudson River in New York. Tech company Siemens said Augustin Escobar, the company's global CEO for its rail infrastructure division, was killed in the crash along with his family and the pilot. The crash is currently under investigation. The chocolate brand Toblerone will once again feature Swiss imagery on its packaging. After moving part of its operations to Slovakia in 2023, it could no longer legally use the Swiss-made label or the iconic Matterhorn image. However, fresh investment from parent company Mondelez will allow the production to move back to Switzerland and therefore the reintroduction of the nation's symbols. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Monica. Japan's largest organized crime syndicate, the Yamaguchi-gumi, has officially declared an end to a decade-long feud with a rival gang that claimed at least 90 lives. This signifies not only a change in Japan's public safety, but also marks a major decline of a criminal organization that had significant influence on politics and economics, both within and outside of Japan. Well, I'm joined now by Julian Ryall, the Daily Telegraph's correspondent in Japan. Julian, thanks very much for coming on the show to explain this for us. First of all, perhaps explain the feud and exactly what has now ended.
This goes back actually more than a decade. So the feud has been going on for 10 years. But the Yamaguchi-gumi was losing people, and the leadership was losing the respect of some of its underlings. And in August 2015, a group decided it would do better by going it alone, if you like. The leader of that group promised anyone who went with him that they'd get more pay and conditions would be far better. So they set up what was then known as the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi. Unfortunately, the original group didn't take too kindly to this sort of signs of defection from the group, and there was a pretty vicious pushback, and it became very, very violent. As you said, there were at least 90 deaths and probably closer to 100. Not all of them may have come to light, and at least 300 incidents. I've been speaking to analysts or experts in this area, and they said it was a full-on war in the city of Kobe, and that sort of spreads over into the city of Osaka as well. It was shootings, it was beatings, and it got very, very serious. So serious that the police decided that they would have to declare what they call, define these two groups as specified violent gangs engaged in conflict. Now that was handy for the police because it then allowed them to crack down on the businesses that these groups were carrying out as well. And that's when it became quite difficult for these groups to carry on the loan sharking, the protection rackets, the involvement in illegal underground gambling, the sex industry, the weapons trading. So that's when it began to really hurt these two gangs. And this is why finally, after 10 years, they've decided to call a truce.
Well, that suggests, Julian, that this truce did not come out of a vacuum, as you say there. How much influence do the yakuza and these two particular groups actually have right now? They've historically had a huge amount of influence on Japanese business, politics, and public safety, for that matter. But was that declining?
It has been declining. The Yamaguchi-gumi, even in 2014, had 10,300 members approximately, and now they're down to 3,300. So people are shifting away from this as a lifestyle, if you like. But yes, in the past, in history, the gangs all across different parts of Japan had a vast amount of power and influence. Back in the 60s, these gangs could call on more than 180,000 foot soldiers, and they were involved in the construction industry, all the illicit businesses that we've talked about, and they had huge influence and a lot of money sloshing around in their accounts as well. They also had a lot of influence with politicians, and that's why they were able to achieve so much. But it has become an unfashionable job for young people now. Nobody really wants to go into this line of business anymore. It's violent. It is no longer as well paid as it was, and young people don't look at it as a good career move.
So, Julian, how much of this then is about this decline from their heights of the past? How much of that is to do with societal changes, as you suggest there, the young no longer interested in this type of work? And how much of this is a success story for the police who have been effectively cracking down on these yakuza?
It really is a combination of both. Not only are the yakuza no longer seen as the Robin Hood types of Japan, the money's poor, the conditions are bad, and the opportunity. It's no longer fashionable to be a yakuza, if you like. But that also goes hand in hand with, as you say, the police and legal crackdowns that have come on from government. There have been a series of legislation in the last 15 years that have really sort of targeted these groups. And I was talking to an analyst yesterday, and he said there were two that really, really have crippled the gangs. The first was when the government made it possible for police to charge a gang leader when one of his underlings shot and killed a rival. So now gang leaders are being held accountable, and they're going to prison for the actions of their underlings. And the second one was when protection rackets were targeted. So yakuza, a lot of their money has come traditionally from protection rackets from legitimate businesses. And when the government changed the law so that legitimate businesses are not now legally allowed to pay these yakuza. So that cut off a huge amount of income for these yakuza almost overnight. There has also been sort of efforts by towns to sort of produce rehabilitation programs, perhaps, for yakuza who want to leave the lifestyle. So it's almost a three-pronged approach to dealing with these groups.
And just finally, Julian, for these two groups that have now declared an end to this feud, what does that exactly mean for them? They're not disbanding. Are they going to regroup? What is their future?
Well, at the moment, the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi is down to 120 guys. And this decision seems very much to have been taken unilaterally by the Yamaguchi Gumi because they have the numbers and the Kobe Yamaguchi Gumi just doesn't have anything to come back to them with. It's possible that they will be reintegrated back into the main organization. It's possible that some will just move on to a life of less crime. But this doesn't mean that crime is over in Japan, of course. You know, the Gumis, the Yakuza groups may have less influence, but we are seeing a shift to other types of crime. We're seeing a lot more online and cyber crime. And these perhaps are the modern versions of the Yakuza of the past.
Julian Ryall from Daily Telegraph in Japan. Thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. The Delphi Economic Forum continues in Greece today, and among the top issues preoccupying the forum is the state of the transatlantic relationship and whether there still is one. Monocle's Andrew Mueller is at the event and posed that exact question to Ian Brzezinski, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Europe Centre and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence for Europe and NATO Policy.
Oh, yes. And I'm actually more worried about European overreaction to Trumpism than I'm worried about the damage Trump can do to the transatlantic relationship, the security relationship in particular over the next 4 years. The ball is in many ways very much in Europe's court. How it manages this relationship will determine whether or not we will have this relationship going forward. And no issue is more decisive in this regard than the security of Ukraine. And this is now Europe's hour, so to speak. Europe needs to stand up. It needs to stop whining about, about Trumpism, about the threat of American abandonment. It needs to start acting as a real partner. It needs to demonstrate the leadership, the commitment, the resources, the drive that comes in a relationship that you have strategic parity, not strategic autonomy, which is kind of signaling we want to leave, but strategic parity means you want to be an equal to the United States in a truly symbiotic, equitable relationship.
And of course, there is no reason why Europe couldn't do that, but when you talk about the danger of European overreaction, what would overreaction look like? Strategic
autonomy is a good example. That's the language in itself communicates a severance of ties, going your own way. I mean, when I think about what Europe needs to do, for example, today to demonstrate strategic parity, it needs to take, the ball of Ukraine's future into its own hands. It needs to stand up and say, we're going to now really leverage our power to force Putin into a defeat. We're going to sanction Russia, body slam its economy using our economic leverage. We're going to use our military capabilities to stand up a deterrent force that's going to be ready and go to deploy to secure Ukraine. Create a situation which it shows it has the will and the resolve in a way that not only benefits Ukraine in itself, but demonstrates to the Trump administration that these guys are setting up a win that he wants to be part of. If they don't do that, they'll lose Ukraine in the transatlantic relationship. If they do that, they'll secure Ukraine and probably create the context for another 8 decades of an effective transatlantic security relationship.
So is it possible then, and I think we might have spoken about this in Washington last year, to read the rhetoric from the Trump administration these last couple of months, and thinking particularly of Vice President Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, as kind of tough love?
I actually think it's a little bit worse than that. I mean, I think this is an administration whose core leadership, the inner circle that make the decisions, have a disdain towards Europe. They're dismissive of Europe's defense capabilities, willingness to kind of defend itself. They feel they've been used by the European economy. They want to reduce our presence in Europe to focus more on homeland defense. But that's not the reflection of the American polity. Most Americans, including the MAGA right, are internationalist in outlook. They believe in NATO. They believe the United States should support an ally that's been attacked. In some ways, they're actually more committed to that than moderate Republicans. So Trump hasn't moved us into a new permanent stage in which a transatlantic relationship has ended. He's moved us into a malleable stage. And the question is, what are the Europeans going to do to shape it in one direction versus another?
But again, going back to that question of whether to overreact, underreact, or react, how difficult or how possible can it be for Europe to calibrate that when it's also... It doesn't know from one day to the next what is going to happen, and it is also having to spend time and energy, and I've spoken to some people here who are having to do that, wondering how serious America actually is about threatening the territory of at least 2 NATO allies.
Well, again, we're talking about a unity among some 30 European nations. And that's, of course, easier said than done.
Sure.
But there is a core that can act. There is a coalition of the willing among those that can take decisive action. And, Macron and the UK are taking initial step in that direction. I'm just encouraging them and others like Poland and the Nordics, if not Italy, to actually be more decisive, demonstrate that unity, because this is an important moment. It is an inflection point. And Europe can decide which way the transatlantic relationship goes by its action, leveraging what it has on hand, not worrying or planning about what it will have on hand 5 years from now. The moment is now.
Coming back to that concept of a coalition of the willing, which I know is language that has been used as a somewhat subtle rebuke to the United States, because this was a concept under which that various European countries accompanied the United States on its wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. But if that European coalition of the willing did find itself contemplating or taking military action on Ukraine's behalf, is that something that should be protected by Article 5? Should it be able to assume that the United States is the ally of last resort if they need them?
It should. And I wish I could look you in the eye and say, absolutely, the Trump administration will do that. But Europe is a little bit in a bind. If it doesn't act, it's going to have a peace imposed upon Ukraine that's perhaps unfair and unstable. If it doesn't act, the United States could walk away from the whole situation. That's just as bad. It's the same outcome, essentially. If it acts decisively, it actually could create a context or a situation in which all of a sudden Trump is juxtaposed against a strong Europe, making him look weak, and he's putting himself in the position where he's going to be denying himself credit for getting a sustained peace in Ukraine, an end of the war, the ceasefire. So if Ukraine acts decisively, they're actually going to create a context that's going to make Trump go, I want to be part of the winning team. I want to take credit for this. If they don't, the situation is just going to get worse.
That was Ian Brzezinski speaking to Andrew Mueller at the Delphi Economic Forum. For more coverage, you can tune into the Foreign Desk every Saturday at midday London time, hosted by Andrew Mueller. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Salone del Mobile is nearing its end in Milan, at least the first week, and among our probably quite haggard Monocle crew that's been partying hard in the evenings, running from event to event throughout the days, is Grace Charlton, Monocle's associate editor who joins me now. Grace, where do we find you today?
I am currently in a little patch of sunshine in a Milanese courtyard at the Appartamento by Artemis. And in front of me, there's a Porsche that's just been parked and filled with flowers. And people are taking loads of photos. I'm probably in the background of the photos, ruining them right now.
A Porsche parked and serving sodas. Is that's just what Milan is like during Salone?
Exactly. It's a bit glam. It's maybe tacky, but it's all about design as well.
So last time you were on this show, Grace, we talked about the young designers. This is what you were tasked with as part of your brief for Salone del Mobile. You have now hung out with those young designers. How young and cool were they?
They are pretty cool. They wear a lot of shirt jackets and funky glasses, and you see them during the day at the showcases, and you see them later at night at Bar Basso, and it's been really fun. A lot of people have been met. We went to a few more showcases today, one called Convey and one called Dioron, and it's just really good to see a curation of these young designers, and they've all been brought together in Milan, and it's just nice. It's a good feeling.
Tell us more about those particular showcases. What were they about? What struck you?
there's a lot of metal still, like a lot of bent aluminium. But I'm also noticing there's a bit of funky glass going on, a lot of sort of champagne glasses, but they're all they look like they've been carved out of rock almost. And that's the new trend I've noticed. And a lot of audio design, so lots of cool speakers and stuff like that. I think that's what's on the mind of the youth these days.
That is what's on the mind of the youth, audio design. I appreciate that, Grace. I'll keep that in mind myself. It is the end of the first week for designers, which is the beginning of the end, or the beginning for the public, rather, in Milan. Are the lines already starting to form out there?
I honestly, because I love design, but my God, the queues are so long. I don't think I could queue for 3 hours to go look at Loewe teapots as much as I would love to. But
that's only, Grace, that's only because you get to go and you don't have to line up like the rest of the poor schmoes of Milan.
I know. The worst is as well with Nick Muniz, the design editor. We just do that awful thing where we cut the queue, we just flash a business card and we just walk straight in. But I always feel a little bit like I can't make eye contact with anyone when that's happening because they've been queuing for hours. It's awful. But no, I mean, it's so nice. And a lot of the people who are queuing up to see these showcases, they're really young and they're super excited and they care about Casina and, you know, all these heritage Italian brands and the fashion brands. So it's such an energized crowd, and I'm just in awe of the power of Salone del Mobile, as always.
It is okay, Grace. We're journalists. We have work to do. We are allowed to pass some of these lines. I'll assuage your guilt for that. But tell us about some of the Monocle events as well that have been happening this week. How did those go?
They went really well. We had we took over a little church to do an event with Design Council Singapore, and it was so cute, but we had to have the DJ outside the church because we couldn't play music inside the church. And obviously all the music couldn't have swear words in them and stuff like that. And but it was really good, and people were super, super happy. Nick Muniz did a lot of radio from a little setup booth we had there. So that was really good. But otherwise, I'm not going to lie, we've mostly been going to other people's events and enjoying not hosting, you know, just enjoying the free drinks and the little tiny little canapes.
You've got to do a little bit of both when you're in Salone del Mobile. Grace Charlton, Monocle's associate editor, thank you very much for joining us. This is The Briefing. And finally, on today's show, Saturday Night Live, the variety show that is live from New York on Saturday night, is fresh off celebrating its 50th anniversary and will now be coming to the UK, according to Sky broadcasters. Now, there are many clips of SNL that we could play from over the years, but here's one that maybe captures the special relationship with the UK more than most.
No, do what you do. Just don't do what you've done. Let's go.
Well, I'm not going to do that, am I? I'm just going to do what I do. That's what I do.
Yeah, all right, well, just do it.
All right, then. Well, that's done and dusted then, isn't it? By the way, you look great.
No, we look great.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hey, let's go over pointing fingers again, OK?
Yeah, cool.
OK. And I'm pointing my finger. Pointing at you.
That was Mick Jagger, regular host of SNL, and Mick Jagger, played by Jimmy Fallon. And joining us now for more on whether the SNL brand of humor can really cross the Atlantic is Scott Bryan, TV critic and broadcaster. Scott, have they already lined up Mick Jagger for the UK version?
Well, they haven't announced really anyone who's been in it. Yesterday's announcement was along the lines of, look, it's coming. There has been speculation of this show, you know, huge brand making its way to the UK for quite some years now. And it looks like they're going to be following through with it. So the release that was sent to journalists yesterday touted, you know, big names, introducing the show's catchphrase, live from London, it's Saturday night. And of course, it's, I think, you know, any sort of welcome show, particularly around comedy, should be praised, just because if you look at the TV industry in the UK at the moment, particularly in the genre of comedy, it is a really difficult time at the moment because of numerous factors. There are very few shows being made. Comedy programs tend to be less lucrative in the short term. Of course, in the long term, if it really hits an audience, it can be hugely lucrative. So a lot of channels are actually quite adverse from making shows like these, particularly around sketch comedy at the moment. So it should be praised. I guess for challenges, will it work? I mean, for first thing, it's on Sky, which is a much smaller network than, let's say, other public service broadcasters like the BBC and ITV. Then there's the translation of comedy. I would say, how many Brits sit down to watch the US version of Saturday Night Live? I'm not so sure, because the style of American humour can be quite jarring. I think it will have to tailor itself specifically to British tastes.
Now, one aspect of this as well, Scott, when you talk about this translation to the UK, they have tried this kind of format a couple of times before, but it wasn't with SNL's own buy-in. This time, Lorne Michaels, the founder, continuing sort of head of Saturday Night Live, will be serving as executive producer. But still, the question to your point, Scott, is does that help? Does he really get British humour?
Well, I mean, that is a big question. I mean, I would certainly not undermine Lorne Michaels. I think the fact that he has been able to be at the heart of American comedy for so many decades now and has managed to spot talent like nobody else, still continues that to this day, knowing what people and what stars could there be from their ability on sort of being able to play with live sketch comedy is an art form that I think is very hard for other people to replicate. And it'll be interesting to see whether he would be able to actually executive produce. I mean, this is a name that he's been associated with this show. But of course, if he's doing it in the US at the same time he's doing the UK, that's a very difficult job to go and do. I think obviously the UK saying Saturday Night Live will certainly attract viewership. We're in an age of a reboot where familiar programs are ones that drag over audiences. So I feel that there'll be a larger natural initial audience than, let's say, another sort of sketch style comedy started from scratch, even if it's in the vein of Saturday Night Live. The name of the show will be a large opportunity. But at the same time, I mean, this is going to be on a much smaller network than other channels. I guess it will come down to actually, and the reason why Saturday Night Live in the US works so well even now in this age of streaming is simply because of the sketches. If it really hits an audience, you can get a few laughs on the night, but then if they clip it make it into a 5-6 minute video that then's uploaded to TikTok, YouTube and so forth, it can attract millions and millions of viewers in a matter of a short space of days, far higher than the actual viewership that initially tuned in. So I think that's part of the logic why they've done this. The interesting thing is, will it work? That's something I can't answer right now.
Scott, when you speak of those clips, we have one more to play because, of course, the political satire is also what SNL is so known for. Let's hear one more from that.
I love your economies.
Oh, wow, geek. Yeah, why don't you Brexit out of here, dweeb?
OMG, was that supposed to be a joke, Boris? You're being so cringe right now.
Yeah, no, I know. It was dumb of me. I'm sorry, guys.
You're always sorry. You just got to try to keep up.
James Corden there playing Boris Johnson. How well would the political satire element of this work in the UK, Scott? And who would we pick to play Keir Starmer?
Oh, that is an interesting one. I mean, I think it's a real opportunity for up-and-coming comedy acts. I mean, the SNL in the US mixes with established players and people who are very well known, and also a mixture of new talent that they're investing in. And I hope that ethos sort of continues over here. I mean, British satire is a very particular thing, I find. We knock down people regardless of any political persuasion, pretty much down to the same level as everyone else, even if they are left-wing or right-wing, I find. And I think that actually, if you look quite recently, a lot of British comedy has been doing quite well in the US. Have I Got News for You, which of course is a very familiar, very well-known British brand, recently got changed into a US version on CNN. And if you tune in on CNN, it's quite different than the UK version, but it still has the same sort of background of riffing on the news, having a pop at everybody, no one's off limits. So I hope this is the reason why, it's still too early to say, but a key reason why, a key hurdle is trying to make it attuned to British taste. I mean, in the same case that in the US, episodes can be up to 90 minutes long. I really don't think British audiences will have that stomach to sit down and watch a 90-minute episode as a live sketch comedy. It's not in our nature.
They might want to listen to those 6-minute clips instead. Scott Bryan, TV critic and broadcaster, thank you very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Monica Lillis and Ryuma Takahashi in Japan. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, have a good weekend, and thanks for listening.